Hello again, everybody. It's Dr. Jordan Taylor, Undergraduate Exercise Science Program Director and Associate Teaching Professor at the University of Kansas. So in a previous video, I had a former athlete, a Division I football player, and also spent some time playing professionally. His name is Kyler Reed. Come into the Exercise Phys and Human Performance Lab and demonstrate some glute strengthening, hamstring strengthening, abdominal strengthening, and also some stretches that could be used and incorporated into a training program for hamstring injury prevention. All right, so I want to kind of go over the guidelines as far as, these different exercises, the number of sets, reps, the loads that you should use for these various exercises, and the rest periods between sets. All right, so the first exercise that Kyler did was kettlebell swings. So these are glute focused, hip extension exercise. So the number of sets I typically recommend for these is 2 to 4 sets for this exercise. Obviously, if you're a beginner and haven't done these before, 2 sets will be adequate initially, and then you can progress to 3 and 4 sets as the weeks and the training sessions go by. Number of reps, a little higher in the rep range here, kind of working on some gluteus maximus muscle endurance. So we're going 15 to 20 reps. These might be good to do at the beginning of the resistance training session. Kind of almost using them as a warm-up for some of the exercises that follow that will be more loaded, okay? So with this higher rep range, the load is going to be lighter, right? So we're going to use a load of less than or equal to 65% of the individual's 1 repetition max on this exercise. If you're using a higher rep range with lighter loads, then the rest period is going to be shorter. So 30 seconds to 1 minute rest periods, okay? So the next exercise, again, focused on glute strengthening with this one, frog pumps. All right, so again, you kind of use this initially, really get those glutes activated. Obviously, you're just using the load would be body weight, because you're just extending the hips off the ground. The sets here, we're looking at 2 to 4 sets. Higher rep range, so 15 to 20 reps. All right, short rest period lengths between sets of 30 seconds to 1 minute. So next exercise is the seated banded hip abduction. All right, so this is more focused on the abductors, the glute medius, glute minimus. Sets here, again, we're looking at 2 to 4. 2 sets for those that are just starting this program, and progress 3 to 4 as you are training more sessions over more weeks. So reps, we're looking again a high rep range because the only thing loading this exercise is going to be the resistance band, right? So obviously a thicker band is going to be more tension, more load. A thinner band, less tension, less load, and you'll be able to complete more reps with a thinner band, right? So that's how the loading works, right? So the load's just going to vary based on the band thickness, all right? So rest period lengths here, we're looking at 30 seconds to 1 minute between sets. So after you do the kettlebell swings, the frog pumps, and the seated band and hip abduction, we're going to start getting into heavier, more loaded exercises. So start with the barbell hip thrust. All right, so again with the barbell hip thrust, because this is heavier, a load, I'm going to talk about load first. So typically here we're going to load this between 67% to 87% of the individual's estimated 1 repetition max. All right, and because it's a heavier load, it's going to take more time between sets to replenish the energy stores. So in between sets when you're resting, you're trying to replenish the energy stores in the phosphagen system. So your adenosine triphosphate, your phosphocreatine, it's all being rebuilt between sets. So to adequately recover with this heavier loading, we need longer rest periods, right? So we're looking at anywhere between 1.5 to 4 minutes here for rest periods, right? Okay, so typically if you were working closer to 87% of your 1 rep max, you would need maybe closer to 3 to 4 rest minutes. If you're working on at 67% of your 1 rep max, less intense, lighter load, then you might be able to get by with 1.5, 2 minutes rest and then go to your next set, okay? Speaking of sets, how many are we looking at here? Well, 2 to 4. Obviously, somebody that hasn't done a lot of this exercise, start out with 2 sets per session and then progress to 4 as the weeks in the training program go by. And the rep range, then we're going to look at 5 to 12 reps, okay? So if you're working with a load closer to 87% of your 1 rep max, you're looking at doing about 5 reps. If you're at 67% of your 1 rep max, then you're going to be completing around 12 reps. That's kind of the estimate, okay? All right, so the next exercise to discuss that focuses on strengthening the hip extensors, the glutes, the hamstrings, is the RDL, which is the Romanian deadlift. So the sets we're looking at completing here, again, 2 to 4. Rep range, we're gonna load these heavier. So again, between 5 and 12 reps. Percentage of 1 repetition max would be 67 to 87% of the individual's estimated 1 rep max on the RDL. And then again, because we're loading this heavier, the rest periods are going to be longer, so anywhere from 1.5 to 4 minutes. All right, again, allowing that phosphagen system time to recover between sets. All right, so the next exercise we're moving on to is the leg press kickback. Squeaky, squeaky. All right, so sets here, we're looking at, again, 2 to 4. Seeing that as kind of a common theme. With the rep range a little higher here, 8 to 12. All right, primarily, again, just training that hip extension movement with this exercise. And with the rep range being shifted to 8 to 12, we're looking at the load being between 67 to 80% of an individual's 1 repetition max on this exercise. And then the rest periods are going to be between 1 to 2 minutes between sets. So the next exercise I'm going to talk about dumbbell zigzag walking lunges. So we're going to do 2 to 4 sets, somewhere in that range again. Repetitions here, move these a little bit, the range a little bit higher, so 10 to 12 reps, which means the load is going to be a little less, so you're using moderately heavy to lighter loads. So for the load on this, we're looking at between 67 to 75% of the person's estimated ability to complete, estimated 1 repetition max for these zigzag walking lunges. The rest periods then are going to be a bit shorter, so we're looking at 1 to 1.5 minutes between sets. Now remember, when we talk about doing the reps here, 10 to 12 reps, that's per leg, right? Because you're going to be alternating when you're walking, right leg, then standing back up, lunging on the left leg, standing back up. So when you're counting, it's 1 to the right, stand up, 1 to the left, stand up, 2 to the right, stand up, 2 to the left, stand up, so on. All right, so it's 10 to 12 reps per leg because basically it turns into a unilateral exercise when you're walking. Moving on to inclined bench, reverse hyper extensions. All right, so this again, we're going to start over here with load. So this is a body weight exercise. Okay, looking at, see this common theme, sticking in that 2 to 4 set range. Reps are going to be higher since it is body weight. All right, so we're looking at, around 15 reps, somewhere 15 to 20, but 15 reps is good. Now you could load this maybe with, say, resistance bands, ankle weights. You can put ankle weights on and then complete the reverse hyperextension movement. But again, it's typically going to be a lighter load than, say, like an RDL or a barbell glute thrust. Okay, so rest periods then, because it's body weight or using ankle weights or lighter loads, they're going to be shorter. So we're looking at 30 seconds to 1 minute of rest between sets. Next exercise, this may be my favorite, along with barbell hip thrusts. This exercise is the Nordic curl or Nordic curls. All right, intense exercise. A lot of people don't focus on the eccentric phase of hamstring training for strength, but again, this is great for injury prevention. So I highly recommend anybody that's incorporating or that's doing a strength training program, incorporate this exercise into that program. So sets here, we're looking at 2 to 4 reps. Now, I'm only going to put a 5 here, right? 5 reps, right? And this is for somebody that's just starting out doing these, okay? They can be intense, right? Because again, you're starting kneeling on the ground, having a partner hold the ankles or the feet, or putting them under an immovable object to support yourself. You're upright, you're on your knees, and you're falling forward toward the ground. And while you're falling forward, your knee starts to move into extension. The hamstring is therefore lengthening, and it's producing tension. If it's not, you're going to crash into the ground. But it's lengthening eccentrically, producing tension to control the rate at which your knee goes into extension, right? So you're resisting your body weight, the force of gravity, and that hamstring is lengthening. And that's important because if you can strengthen that hamstring in the eccentric phase of, say, sprinting is typically when it's injured. So again, this is a great exercise for loading that eccentric phase. And speaking of loading, again, the load here, well, it's obviously going to be your body weight. Now there's ways to help you do this exercise using resistance bands to help take some of the load off the hamstrings and make it easier. For instance, if you tied a resistance band around the top of a squat rack and then you were kneeling in front of the squat rack performing this exercise, and then you put the other end of the band and wrap it around your chest, under your armpits, and then as you lower down to the floor, that resistance band is going to lengthen. There's going to be some tension produced backward towards your body, and then that can help take some of that load off the hamstrings and make it a little easier for somebody that's just starting to execute this exercise. So again, just 5 reps starting out with body weight. You can increase the reps, the sets as the weeks go by in your training program. So rest periods I've got here, 2 minutes between sets. Now the main thing with the rest period is just make sure that the individual's fully recovered. We don't want their hamstrings being extremely fatigued. If the hamstrings are really fatigued or sore and you're doing this eccentric loading, then they may be at risk of actually injuring them when this is supposed to be helping to prevent injuries and strengthen that area. So just 2 minutes is a good general guideline, but just make sure that the athlete or the person doing these is fully recovered, all right, and not fatigued. Next exercise, seated leg curls. All right, so this is training knee flexion. It's helping strengthen knee flexion in both the concentric shortening phase and the eccentric lengthening phase. Whereas, if you compare that to the Nordic curl, that's strengthening the hamstrings primarily just during that eccentric phase. So sets here for leg curls. Again, we're going to stick with 2 to 4 sets. The rep range on leg curls, I've got a little bit higher 8 to 12 reps, which means then the load is going to shift to 67% to 80% of a person's 1 rep max. As far as rest periods, we're looking at 1 to 2 minutes rest between sets. Next we have stability, ball, leg curls. All right, so sets here, we're gonna stick in that 2 to 4 rep range, or set range, I'm sorry. So 2 to 4 sets. Rep range, 15 to 20 repetitions. This is gonna be a body weight exercise. And the rest period length then is gonna be 30 seconds to 1 minute between sets, because again, it's not heavily loaded, it's a body weight exercise. A couple points here to make is, remember, initially starting out with someone that doesn't have very strong hamstrings, you can perform this exercise with both heels on the stability ball. So it's bilateral, using both legs to curl the heels towards the butt. As they get stronger, turn this into a unilateral exercise. So have them do, 15 reps with the right heel on the ball and just curling with the right hamstring, and then switch to the left leg and 15 repetitions with the left leg to complete the set. All right, so now we're going to transition into talking about some of the exercises to strengthen the abdominal muscles. So we have the MB, medicine ball crunch. Okay, do this with a partner. So rep range here, we're looking at 2 to 4 sets. The number of reps, I said rep range, set range, I keep saying that. Set range is 2 to 4 sets. The rep range is going to really depend on how heavy of a medicine ball you use, right? Heavier ball, you generally won't complete as many reps, whereas a lighter medicine ball, you're going to be able to complete more reps. So I'm going to write for the load here is going to vary depending on what weight of medicine ball you use. But for the rep range, somewhere between 12 to 20 should suffice. And the rest period, then you're looking at 30 seconds to 1 minute of rest between sets. Next abdominal strengthening exercise are the reverse crunch swipers. All right, so sets here, again, we're looking at 2 to 4. The number of reps, a little bit higher here with the rep range, 15 to 20. Obviously the load, this is just going to be body weight. Because really you're just having to curl your lower extremities towards your torso. So again, body weight, and the rest period, 30 seconds to 1 minute between sets. All right, the next abdominal strengthening exercise, in contrast to the other two, is going to help strengthen the core in the horizontal plane, right? Because there's some twisting here. This is also called the transverse plane. So that exercise is the medicine ball Russian twist. So the reverse swipers and the medicine ball crunch, those take place, those are flexion extension movements. They take place in the sagittal plane, whereas this one takes place in the transverse or horizontal plane, because you have, again, this rotation of the spine to the right and to the left that's occurring. Okay, so sets here, 2 to 4. The reps, we're going to look for 12 to 20 each side, right? Because again, you're going to rotate right with the medicine ball and then rotate left. So it's 1, 1, 2, 2. Okay, that's how you're going to count those. The load is going to vary, obviously, depending on the weight of the medicine ball that you use. Heavier medicine ball, generally going to perform less reps. A lighter medicine ball, more reps. So then on to rest period, we're looking at about 30 seconds to 1 minute of rest between sets. Now we've talked about the strengthening exercises for the glutes, the hamstrings, And the abdominals, we're moving into talking about stretches, all right? So the first stretch is the kneeling hip flexor stretch, all right? So with the kneeling hip flexor stretch, again, you repeat this stretch on each leg, all right, for 3 sets. Now remember, it's the leg that's back. The leg that's back that has the knee on the ground, that's the leg that's being stretched, right? The hip flexors of that knee that's down and leg that's back. Those hip flexors, such as the iliopsoas, rectus femoris, those hip flexor muscles are being stretched on that leg, okay? So the reps, obviously this is a static stretch, so you're going to hold this stretch for about 30 seconds, okay? 30 to 60, right? You're holding that stretch. The load, there's no load. I mean, this is, again, a stretch. Rest period between stretching, just a few seconds, okay? And then remember, complete this stretch for each leg. So if you're doing the stretch on the left leg with that left leg kneeling, then you'll need to switch and put the right leg back behind you, kneel on that leg, and stretch those hip flexors. All right, so the next stretch we're moving on to is the prone, which means lying face down, banded quadriceps stretch. Mouthful there. All right, so the number of sets here, we're looking at 3. There's no reps. It's just a static stretch that's being held. Okay, so just hold this for 30 to 60 seconds. Okay, somewhere in that range. Obviously no load. The rest period between stretching, few seconds on each leg. Okay, so remember to stretch the left and stretch the right. Next we have the supine banded hamstring stretch. So supine means you're lying on your back, facing up towards the ceiling. So the sets here, we're going to stick with 3 as we've done with the other stretches. Again, you're not performing a repetition here. You're just holding this as a static stretch for approximately 30 seconds. You can go up to 60. Load, no load. The rest period, again, is just going to be a few seconds between holding subsequent stretches. All right, so just want to go over some general guidelines for incorporating all these exercises into your program. So number 1, perform these resistance training exercises twice per week on lower body training days. All right, so it's important to rest adequately between these strength training sessions. So make sure you allow 48 to 72 hours rest, so 2 to 3 days, before training the same muscle groups again. And when I say training them, I mean with strength training, right? You can stretch as often as you want, but with strength training, you need this 48 to 72 hour rest period before you really hammer those glutes and hamstrings and again. All right, so on your lower body resistance training days, you may have a plethora of lifts scheduled to complete. So things like squats, maybe you're doing power cleans, maybe even lower body plyometrics. I mean, there could be a lot scheduled on those lower body days. So, all of the exercises that you saw listed here, we had a lot of glute exercises, 3 different hamstring exercises. You don't need to complete all of these on your lower body resistance training days. That would be too much, right? In addition to the other lower body exercises you're doing. So just pick like 2 glute strengthening exercises. They're, focused there. 2 hamstring focused exercises and 2 abdominal exercises. We don't want to do too much training and have you overtrained and have your muscles really broken down. So just 2 of each of those on your lower body resistance training days. All right, so with the static stretches that were shown, it's important to complete these after your strength training sessions, okay, and not before. It's great to do a dynamic warm-up and dynamic stretching before you do your strength training, but make sure you do the static stretches after your strength training sessions. And I've talked about the importance of that in another video.